I saw something I shouldn't have. That's how these things always start, isn't it? Not with a warning, not with a premonition. Just a moment of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, holding a tray of dirty martinis with olives that someone had touched and pushed back across the bar. The Roosevelt Hotel's back corridor wasn't supposed to be occupied that night. I'd worked the evening shift at the Velvet Room, the hotel's private lounge, for 3 years, and I knew the rhythms. When to slip through the service hallway, when to avoid the penthouse elevator, when the security detail changed shifts. The owners didn't care what we saw or heard. They'd trained us into invisibility. But invisibility only works if you stay silent. I ducked into the corridor to grab fresh linens from the storage closet, my feet aching in those ridiculous heels they made us wear. The hallway was cold, lit by that industrial white light that made everything look like a crime scene. My reflection in the polished glass door showed me exactly what I'd become. A ghost in a black dress. Auburn hair twisted so tight my scalp ached. Eyes that had learned not to see. That's when I heard the voices. At first, I thought it was just hotel guests. But the tone, low, controlled, laced with a particular kind of violence, stopped me mid-step. I shouldn't have looked. Every instinct I'd cultivated over 3 years screamed at me to keep walking, to grab the linens, to vanish back into the lounge where the jazz was soft and the problems belonged to other people. Instead, I looked. The door to the executive suite was cracked open, maybe 3 inches. Through it, I saw a man standing with his back to me. Tall. Expensive suit, charcoal gray, tailored so precisely it looked like armor. His hand was raised, and he was holding something. Not a gun, not yet, but the way he held it suggested that guns were familiar to him. He was holding a ledger. "This discrepancy," he said, his voice so quiet I had to strain to hear it, "explains itself, or you do." The man on the receiving end of this question made a sound. Not quite a word, not quite a whimper. He was older, with the soft face of someone who'd spent too many years behind a desk, and he was trembling so hard I could see his shoulders shake from where I stood. "Signor Alessio, I can explain." The man with the ledger. Alessio turned his head just slightly. I saw his profile. Sharp, beautiful in a way that made my stomach drop. Dark eyes that looked like they'd been carved from obsidian and set into a face that had been designed specifically to make people afraid. He looked about 35. He looked like he'd never questioned anything in his life. "No," he said. "You can't." He lowered his hand. The ledger slapped against the desk with a sound like a gunshot. The older man flinched. "I should have left then. I know that now. I've replayed this moment 1,000 times, and every time I reach this point, I know I should have walked away, should have grabbed the linens, should have become the ghost they'd trained me to be." But he turned. Alessio turned fully toward the sound. I hadn't even realized I'd made a small intake of breath, a subtle shift of weight, and his eyes found mine through that 3-inch crack of darkness. Time did something strange. It didn't stop. Exactly. It fragmented. I was aware of 1,000 things simultaneously. The hem of my dress, the way my heart had stopped beating, and then started again at double speed, the smell of rain from the open window, the weight of the linen bundle I was supposed to carry, the exact angle of his gaze as it traveled from my eyes to my dress to the small name tag that read, Nina. He saw me. In that moment, with a terrified man standing behind him and a ledger full of crimes on the desk, Alessio Moretti saw me, and something in his expression shifted, not recognition, but something darker, a kind of interest that made my skin feel too tight. "Get out," he said to the older man, his eyes never leaving mine. The man didn't need to be told twice. He practically fell over himself getting toward a back exit, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. I heard a door slam somewhere in the distance. And then it was just us. Alessio stepped fully into the doorway. In the fluorescent light I could see every detail. The expensive watch, the way his jaw was constructed, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the ring on his right hand, gold, heavy, with a symbol I didn't recognize. Everything about him screamed old money and older violence. "You work here," he said. Not a question. I couldn't make my voice work. My mouth was dry. I was supposed to say yes, probably. I was supposed to apologize, to explain myself away, to make myself smaller and less seen. That's what I'd been trained to do. Instead, I said, "I saw something." His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. A kind of dark amusement. "Yes," he agreed. "You did." He stepped closer. Just one step, but it was enough to close the distance between us. I could smell him now, cologne and cigarette smoke, and something underneath that like rain-wet stone. "What's your name?" he asked. "Nina," I whispered, even though he'd already read it from my tag. "Nina," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Are you smart, Nina?" I realized, in that moment, that I was being offered a choice. He was asking me something that wasn't really a question at all. He was asking, "Are you smart enough to understand what happens to people who talk about what they see?" "Yes," I said. "Good." He reached out, and I thought he might touch my face. Instead, he took the linen bundle from my arms, his fingers brushing mine for half a second. That touch felt like a threat and a promise, and something that made my pulse spike in a way that had nothing to do with fear. He set the linens on a nearby table. "Go back to work, Nina," he said. "Pour drinks. Smile at guests. Forget this happened. And if I can't?" The words left my mouth before I could stop them. He smiled. "It was the most dangerous thing I'd ever seen. Then we'll have a different conversation," he said. "One I don't think you'll enjoy." He stepped back into the suite and closed the door. I stood in that cold hallway for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. My hands shaking, my entire body vibrating with a fear that tasted like metal and felt disturbingly similar to attraction. Behind that closed door, I heard him pick up the phone. I heard him say one word, "Clean." And I understood, with absolute clarity, that Alessio Moretti had just offered me mercy. The question was, for how long? 3 days passed. 3 days of pouring drinks with steady hands, and smiling at guests who tipped poorly and asking about their evenings in a voice that belonged to someone else entirely. 3 days of going home to my apartment in Murray Hill, locking both doors, checking the windows, and lying awake wondering if someone was coming for me. 3 days of knowing that I'd seen something that could destroy a life, and that I was still alive. That seemed significant. The 4th day, I found out who he was. I learned it the way everyone learns important information in New York, through gossip. One of the older bartenders, Marcus, mentioned it casually while we were setting up for the evening service. He was wiping down glasses, his movements economical after 40 years in the business. "That guy in the penthouse the other night?" he said, not looking at me. "The one who made that guy cry?" "I didn't see anything," I said immediately. Marcus smiled. He had the kind of smile that suggested he knew exactly how much I'd seen. "Right," he said. "You didn't see anything. Anyway, that was Alessio Moretti. Moretti family. Old money, older crimes. His father ran things until about 5 years ago, then Alessio took over. Handles the legitimate businesses. The other stuff. He trailed off, which was almost worse than if he'd finished the sentence." "What other stuff?" I asked, against my better judgment. "The kind that doesn't get discussed," Marcus said. "But between you and me, the guy's not stupid. He's not the type to play games or make mistakes. If you saw him do something, and you're still breathing, it's because he decided that's how things should be." That was supposed to be reassuring. It wasn't. I'd made a bargain, I realized. I'd traded my safety for silence. And as long as I kept my end of the bargain, Alessio Moretti would keep his. But that kind of understanding, that kind of debt didn't sit easy. It sat like a stone in my chest. On the 7th day, he came back. He didn't come with the same dramatic quality as before. There was no violent interrogation happening in the penthouse. No terrified man making deals with his life. He simply walked into the lounge around 11 o'clock, ordered a Negroni from Marcus, and sat in a corner booth, reading a newspaper as if he owned it. He probably did own it. He probably owned half of Manhattan. I avoided looking at him for 40 minutes. I poured drinks for people who didn't matter, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, cleared glasses from tables where couples were too caught up in each other to notice the world ending around them. But I felt him watching. That awareness was physical, like being touched without being touched, like standing in sunlight after weeks in darkness. It made my hands shake in ways that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with something I didn't want to name. Finally, inevitably, our eyes met. He smiled slightly and gestured for me to come over. "No," I mouthed, shaking my head. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He set down his newspaper. He picked up his drink and took a deliberate sip. He was telling me that he was patient, that this was going to happen, that my refusal was merely a delay rather than a denial. I walked over. "Mr. Moretti," I said, keeping my voice level, "is something wrong with your drink?" "Nothing's wrong with my drink," He gestured to the seat across from him. Sit. I'm working. I know. He leaned back slightly. I'm asking anyway. I sat. This close, I could see the details I'd missed in the hallway. The way his eyes weren't just dark, they were layered, different shades of obsidian and black and something almost amber in the center. The way his hands moved with precise efficiency. No wasted motion. The way he carried himself as if violence was just one of his possible futures, not a threat. You haven't spoken about what you saw, he said. Not a question. No. Good. He picked up his drink. That's smart. I like smart. Is that why you came back? I asked. To make sure I was still being smart? Partly. He leaned forward slightly. His cologne, that rain-wet stone scent, surrounded me. Mostly I came back because I was curious. About what? About you. He said it simply, as if it made perfect sense. You work here 3 years. You're invisible the way you've trained yourself. But you're not actually invisible. You're just excellent at observation. You notice things. You notice people. He paused. You noticed me. My throat was dry. I did my job. No, he said quietly. If you'd done your job, you would have kept walking. Instead, you looked. You chose to see. And now you own that choice, I said, understanding settling into my bones. That's what you're saying. I saw you, so now I'm dead. You could frame it that way, he said. Or you could understand that I'm giving you a choice. A real one. He set down his glass with deliberate care. Forget what you saw. Pretend I'm just another guest. Build whatever ordinary life makes you happy. Marry someone safe. Have children. Die at 80 without ever knowing what it felt like to actually matter. He said it all so casually, as if he was describing something inevitable, rather than offering an alternative. Or, I asked, or, except that you've already crossed a line, and see what's on the other side of it. That sounds dangerous, I whispered. It is, he agreed. It's also the only thing either of us will ever remember about being alive. He stood, left cash on the table too much, deliberately too much, and walked out of the lounge without waiting for my response. But I understood, as I watched him leave, that I'd already made a choice the moment I looked through that crack in the door. Everything else was just deciding which version of myself I wanted to become. I did something stupid. Well, stupider than just being involved with Alessio Moretti, which was already the definition of stupid. But this was an additional layer of stupidity that I should have recognized and avoided like the very particular brand of fire it was. I looked him up. This was predating the internet's death spiral into uselessness, but not by much. I found newspaper articles from 3 years ago, Alessio's father, Vittorio Moretti, passing the business to his son. There was a photo of them together at some charity event. Vittorio was smaller than I expected, elegant in a way that suggested he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Alessio stood slightly behind and to the left, with an expression of absolutely no feeling whatsoever. The caption read, Vittorio Moretti, 68, founder of Moretti Enterprises, passes the reins to son Alessio, 32. The family continues a legacy of philanthropic work and legitimate business development in the New York area. Legitimate business development. That was what they called it when the articles needed to pretend they didn't know what everyone in the city already understood. The Moretti family had made their money the way most old money in New York had made theirs, through criminal enterprise, corruption, and the strategic elimination of obstacles. The difference was that Alessio had actually mastered the art of looking respectable while remaining fundamentally unredeemable. I found exactly one personal detail that seemed to matter. He'd never married. No long-term relationships in any of the society pages. No scandals with women. He was, by all accounts, romantically unavailable in the way that suggested either celibacy or the kind of casual cruelty that made people keep their distance. I told myself this was good information to have. I told myself it was important to understand the architecture of someone before you let them into your life. I was lying to myself. The truth was simpler and more damaging. I was trying to understand him because I'd already decided to let him in. I just hadn't admitted it yet. The next time he came to the lounge, I was ready. Or as ready as anyone can be to surrender to a man who traffics in violence the way other people traffic in emotion. You look like you want to say something, he said, sliding into the booth before I could pretend I hadn't been, waiting for him. Don't. I'd rather you show me. Show you what? I asked. He picked up my hand, the one holding my notepad, and placed a key in my palm. The Roosevelt, he said. Penthouse suite. Midnight. And then he was gone. I didn't go. I told myself I wouldn't go. I spent the evening telling myself every rational reason why midnight rendezvous in penthouse suites with known criminals was a decision that ended badly. I thought about the stories, not the ones in the papers, but the ones Marcus had hinted at. Women who'd gotten involved with powerful men, women who'd disappeared or changed or learned too late that they'd been playing a game with rules they didn't know existed. At 11:47 p.m., I was in a taxi heading toward the Roosevelt. At 11:58 p.m., I was standing in front of the penthouse elevator, the key burning in my hand like it was radioactive. At 12 a.m., the doors opened, and I stepped inside. The penthouse wasn't what I expected. I'd anticipated dark wood, leather, the kind of aggressive masculinity that gets expressed through interior design. Instead, it was pale, minimalist, enormous windows that showed the city laid out like a circuit board of light. And everywhere, plants. Not houseplants, real gardens, roses and jasmine and things I didn't have names for, creating pockets of living warmth in all that clean, cold space. Alessio was standing by one of the windows, silhouetted against Manhattan. "You came," he said, not turning around. "You knew I would." "Yes." He turned then. In the darkness with the city lights painting him in electric blue and gold, he looked almost human. But knowing and having it happen are different things. He walked toward me slowly, which was somehow more threatening than if he'd lunged. Each step was deliberate. By the time he reached me, I was holding my breath. "This is the part where you get to decide," he said quietly. "Whether this is something that happens between us, or whether it's something I do to you. The difference is consent. Small word, enormous implications." "What do you want?" I asked. "Everything," he said. "Eventually, but right now, I want to know what you taste like." He kissed me. It wasn't tender. It wasn't romantic. It was a taking, a claiming, a statement of intent expressed through the grammar of his mouth against mine. His hand came up to the back of my neck, and he held me there while the world reorganized itself around the point of contact between us. When he pulled away, I couldn't remember my own name. "Who are you?" I whispered. "Someone who collects things," he said. "Beautiful, dangerous, singular things. I think you might be one of those things. That doesn't sound like love." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. Love is what ordinary people settle for when they can't have something better. I'm offering you obsession, protection, a life that doesn't look like anyone else's." He stepped back, and I realized I was shaking. "You can leave right now," he said. "Walk. Away. I'll never bother you again. You'll be safe and ordinary, and you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what it would have felt like to stay." He gestured toward the elevator. "Or you can stay," he continued. "You can let me teach you what it means to be worth protecting, and in exchange, you'll learn that the world is darker and more beautiful than you ever imagined it could be." I looked at the elevator. I looked at the door to the gardens. I looked at Alessio Moretti, who was offering me damnation wrapped in silk. I chose him. Not because I loved him. Not because I was naive enough to think this would end happily, but because the alternative returning to invisibility, to safety, to ordinary, suddenly felt like the cruelest fate anyone could offer. I stepped toward him, instead of toward the door. His smile was like a predator's. It was the most honest moment of his life. The problem with making a deal with the devil is that the devil has competitors. For 2 weeks, I existed in a strange, suspended reality. I kept my job at the lounge. I kept my apartment. I kept my life looking normal on the surface. But every night, I was in the penthouse. Every night, I was learning exactly how dangerous it was to matter to someone like Alessio Moretti. He didn't rush anything. That was somehow worse than if he had. He kissed me in those gardens, trailed his fingers across my skin, whispered things in Italian that I didn't understand but felt in my bones. He moved through the apartment like he was choreographing something, every motion deliberate, every touch strategic. He was teaching me something. That intimacy could be a form of warfare. But he didn't take me to bed. Not in the way I was beginning to crave, with a desperation that felt almost dangerous. "Patience," he'd murmur against my neck. "Everything that matters requires patience." I should have recognized this as a warning. Instead, I recognized it as a promise. On the 15th night, everything changed. I was at the lounge when it happened. Friday night, busy. The kind of evening where you get lost in the rhythm of pouring drinks and clearing glasses and pretending that everything is fine. Around 9 p.m., 2 men came in. They weren't the usual type. They had that specific bearing of people who were about to cause problems. They sat in a corner booth. They ordered expensive whiskey, and they spent 3 hours watching me. At first, I thought it was paranoia, but Marcus noticed it too. He pulled me aside around midnight. "Those guys," he said quietly. "You know them?" "No." "Then we have a problem," he said. "Because I know them, and they don't look at people like that unless someone sent them." My stomach dropped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Marcus said carefully, "that whatever situation you're in, it's about to get more complicated." At 12:30 a.m., when I went to the back to grab fresh supplies, I found a note tucked into my locker. No envelope, no ceremony, just paper, with a single sentence in handwriting that was sharp enough to draw blood. "Tell Alessio the Castellano family knows about his waitress." My hands shook as I pulled out my phone. I called the penthouse. No answer. I called again. Nothing. I was trying to figure out my next move when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Get out of the lounge. Now, go to the Roosevelt, penthouse. Don't tell anyone." I didn't ask how Alessio had sent this message when he hadn't answered my call. I didn't waste time wondering how he knew I'd be in danger. I simply walked up to my manager, told him I'd gotten sick, and left. The night air outside the lounge was cold enough to make me gasp. I was so focused on the street ahead that I almost didn't notice the car pulling up beside me. The window rolled down. It was the man from the back corridor, the one I'd seen Alessio intimidating what felt like a lifetime ago. "Get in," he said. His name was Giuseppe. I'd learn this later. For now he was just a threat with a car. "No," I said, and I started walking faster. "Signorina." His tone suggested I was being difficult about something very simple. "I have orders to get you to safety. The alternative is I leave you here, and the Castellano family finds you within the hour. You want that?" I got in the car. The ride to the Roosevelt was silent except for the sound of the radio playing something in Italian. Giuseppe kept glancing in the rear-view mirror, watching for tails. His jaw was tight, and his hands gripped the steering wheel like it had personally offended him. "How long have you been seeing him?" Giuseppe asked finally. "How is that relevant?" I countered. "Because the Castellano family doesn't move unless they think they have leverage," he said. "And they only think they have leverage if you matter to someone they want to hurt." The words landed somewhere deep inside me, in a place I hadn't known existed. When we got to the penthouse, Alessio was already there, but there wasn't alone. There was an older man with him, elegant in a way that suggested authority rather than intimidation. It took me a moment to recognize him from the photographs. Vittorio Moretti, Alessio's father. "Nina," Alessio said, and I heard something in his voice I'd never heard before. Not softness, exactly, but something that bordered on it. "You're safe." "What's happening?" I asked. "The Castellano family," Vittorio said, his accent thicker than Alessio's, his English measured and precise, "believes they can leverage my son's newfound weakness to consolidate power. They're wrong about the leverage. They may not be wrong about the weakness." He looked at me the way Alessio had looked at that man in the corridor, with absolutely no mercy. "Who are you?" he asked. "Nina," I said again, because it was the only true thing I knew. "Specifically, a waitress." Vittorio glanced at his son. Alessio didn't respond. "I see," Vittorio said. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "You've chosen someone with no connections, no leverage of her own, no way to be useful except by being a target." "Yes," Alessio said quietly. "Foolish," Vittorio said, "and potentially catastrophic." "Perhaps," Alessio agreed. "But she's mine now, which means anyone who threatens her dies." The words fell into the penthouse like stones into still water. Vittorio studied me for a long moment, and then, slowly, he smiled. "Good," he said. "We'll make use of her." Something in that sentence terrified me more than anything that had come before, because I understood, in that moment, that I wasn't Alessio's weakness to be managed. I was about to become a weapon. Vittorio Moretti's plan was both elegant and absolutely calculated to destroy me. "The Castellano family thinks you're a weakness." He'd explained that first night, pacing the penthouse like a general mapping strategy. "We'll let them continue thinking that, but we'll use that assumption against them." "How?" I'd asked, though I could already feel the trap closing. "You'll become inseparable from Alessio. Publicly, every major event, Every meeting with business partners, every restaurant and charity function where people see you. He'll treat you like you matter, like you're protected, like harming you would be tantamount to declaring war. And then, Vittorio said, we'll have made you so visible, so clearly his, that the Castellano family will realize you're not leverage, you're a partner, and partners are far less useful as hostages. What he didn't say was that this plan required me to become something I'd never been. Visible. I moved out of my apartment in Murray Hill. Alessio had clothes brought to the penthouse designer, things that cost more than my rent. He had a stylist arrive to cut and color my hair, transforming the muted auburn I'd been cultivating for invisibility into something that caught light and demanded attention. You're afraid, he observed on the pause. Third day. Watching me study my reflection in the penthouse mirror, I looked like a different woman. Sharper, more dangerous, more his. Of course I'm afraid, I said. Your father wants to use me as bait. Bait implies weakness, he said, coming to stand behind me. He placed his hands on my shoulders, and I felt something inside me still. He's using you as a statement. There's a difference. Semantics. Yes, he agreed, but powerful ones. People believe what they're told they should believe. If you walk into a room on my arm, if I touch you the way I want to touch you, if I look at you like you're the only thing worth seeing, then people will believe you're important. You'll stop being bait. You'll become protected. Except I won't be, I said. I'll just be more visible when they come for me. He turned me around. His eyes found mine, and I saw something there that looked almost like understanding. Do you trust me? No, I said immediately. Good, he said. Trust is for people who haven't seen what I'm actually capable of. But you have. So what you have instead is knowledge. And knowledge is stronger than trust. The first public appearance was a charity gala at the Plaza Hotel. Black tie. Hundreds of Manhattan's elite. People who knew exactly what the Moretti family did and pretended not to know, because that was how the world worked. I wore a dress that cost more than my annual salary, charcoal gray, cut to emphasize the line of my throat, my shoulders, the small of my back. When Alessio saw me, he went absolutely still. What? I asked, suddenly paranoid about my appearance. Nothing, he said quietly. Everything. You're beautiful when you're terrified. I don't think you realize that. At the gala, he never left my side. His hand rested at the small of my back as we moved through the crowd. He introduced me to people whose names I forgot immediately. Bankers, politicians, women dripping in jewelry that represented the concentrated wealth of generations. This is Nina, he'd say, in a tone that suggested he was introducing them to something sacred. My person. Not my girlfriend. Not my date. My person. I watched the reactions carefully. Surprise on some faces, calculation on others, and on the faces of the men Vittorio had pointed out as Castellano associates, a kind of dark recognition. They understood what was being communicated. Around midnight, one of them approached. He was older, with the bearing of someone who'd survived through intelligence rather than violence. She's beautiful, he said to Alessio, completely ignoring me as if I were a painting being discussed by two collectors. Yes, Alessio agreed. Dangerous game, attaching yourself to someone. Only if you're afraid of losing them, Alessio said quietly. His hand on my back pressed slightly deeper into my skin. I'm not afraid of anything. The man smiled without humor and walked away. After the gala, in the penthouse, Alessio made love to me for the first time. It wasn't violent, but it wasn't gentle either. It was thorough, consuming, like he was mapping me, claiming me, writing himself into my body in ways that couldn't be undone. He whispered in Italian things I didn't understand but felt in my spine, my chest, the space between my heart and his. Afterward, I lay against him in the darkness of the penthouse, listening to the city breathe outside. Your father's plan, I said. It requires me to be convinced that I'm actually yours, not pretending to be yours, actually yours. Yes, he said. So is that what you're doing? Convincing me? He was quiet for a long time. I'm trying to give you the option to actually be mine, he said finally. Rather than just existing in proximity to me. There's a difference. What's the difference? One means you get to leave if you want to, he said. The other means you stay because you choose to. Every single day. He kissed the top of my head, and I realized, with a kind of dread that felt like falling, that I was no longer afraid of him. I was afraid of what would happen if I lost him. And that fear was infinitely more dangerous than anything the Castellano family could offer. 4 weeks into being Alessio's person, I found the photograph. It was an accident. I was looking for something else, a sweater he'd borrowed, I think. Or maybe I was just cataloging the apartment in the way people do when they're trying to understand someone. The photo was tucked into a book of Italian architecture that sat on the lowest shelf of the penthouse library. A woman, dark hair, sharp features, eyes that held a kind of crystalline coldness that made me understand, immediately and completely, that I was looking at someone who'd been important, not just romantically important. The way her hand rested on his shoulder, the way his expression was soft in a manner I'd never seen before or since this was a woman who'd mattered. "Lucia," Alessio said from behind me. He'd appeared, without sound, which was one of his particular talents. I didn't turn around. "Who was she?" "Someone I was supposed to marry," he said, before everything changed. I closed the book carefully and placed it back on the shelf. "What changed?" "She did," he said. "Or I did. Or the world did. All of the above." I turned to face him. "What happened?" He looked at me for a long moment, really looked at me, in that way that suggested he was weighing whether I could handle the answer. "She realized that loving me meant understanding that I would sacrifice anything, anyone for this family," he said finally. "She couldn't live with that. She married someone safer, someone from a completely different world. Last I heard, they have 3 children." "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Her leaving?" "No," he said, "but I regret that she felt she had to. I regret that she understood something about me that I couldn't change, and that understanding made her run." He stepped closer. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand what you're choosing. I'm not a good man, Nina. I'm not going to become one. Whatever you build with me, you're building on a foundation of careful cruelty and necessary violence." "I know," I said. "Do you?" he asked. "Or do you think I'm being dramatic? That underneath the ruthlessness, there's actually a good man waiting to be unlocked?" "I think," I said carefully, "that you're trying to scare me away. And I'm trying to understand why." He laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuine. "Because," he said, "if you stay, I'm going to become obsessed with keeping you. And obsession is a disease that destroys everything it touches." I stepped toward him. "So push me away. Let me leave." "I could," he said, "but I don't want to." "Then stop telling me I should go." He cupped my face in his hands, a gesture so tender it was almost cruel. "If you stay," he said, "there will be moments where you realize what I actually am. Not what I tell you. Not what you've constructed in your imagination. But what I actually do. What I actually am capable of." "I know," I said again. "I've already seen it." "Not like this," he said quietly. "Not when it affects someone you care about." "Is there someone I'm supposed to care about?" I asked. "Your family," he said. "Your mother, your sister. They're the only leverage anyone has." My breath caught. I'd been so focused on survival, on understanding Alessio, that I'd almost forgotten I had a family. My mother taught yoga in Brooklyn. My sister worked in publishing. They existed in a different universe, one that didn't include men like Alessio Moretti. "What about them?" I asked, and I could hear the fear in my voice. "My father is using them as insurance," Alessio said. "Discreet surveillance, nothing violent. But if things go badly, if the Castellano family decides to move against you through them, my father has leverage." I felt something inside me crack. "You're using my family as insurance." "No," he said. "My father is. I'm telling you so you understand that I can't protect them the way I can protect you. They're exposure for me. They're risk." He said it without emotion, but I could hear the cost of the honesty beneath the words. "Can they leave the city?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "I'm working on it. I've already made arrangements. Your mother has been offered a teaching position in Miami. Very prestigious. The school is legitimate, not connected to us. They'll be safe there. And if I tell them to go, then they're safer," he said. "But you become untethered. You become just mine, with no other claims on you. Is that what you want?" He was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "What I want is for you to choose to stay even though you could leave. I want you to understand exactly what I'm capable of and decide that it's worth it anyway. That I'm worth it anyway." I looked at the man standing in front of me, the man who'd taught me that intimacy could be a form of warfare, that violence could be a language, that love and obsession were perhaps the same thing wearing different masks. I'll call them tonight, I said. I'll tell them to go to Miami. Relief flickered across his face. Thank you. But I'm not doing it because of your father's insurance policy, I said. I'm doing it because I need them to be safe. Because if they're in another city, in another state, then I can stop dividing my attention between protecting them and understanding you. He pulled me close. You're not good for me, he whispered against my hair. No, I agreed. But I'm exactly what you deserve. That night, I made the call. I told my mother that an amazing opportunity had opened up in Miami, that the money was too good to refuse, that I needed her and my sister to go immediately. My mother heard the weight in my voice and didn't ask questions. Will you be safe? She asked instead. Yes, I lied. Will you come see us? She asked. Yes, I said, and this time it might have been the truth. After I hung up, Alessio held me while I cried, and somewhere in the darkness of that penthouse, surrounded by the man I'd somehow fallen in love with, I understood that I'd just made myself completely his. There was no going back now. The betrayal came from inside. Vittorio called an emergency meeting in the penthouse's study, a room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a desk that looked like it had seen centuries of dark decisions. Alessio and I had been together for 6 weeks. I'd stopped questioning whether I should be at these meetings. I'd simply become a fixture, the woman who existed at the periphery of the Moretti family's empire. This time, I should have left. Alessio's hand on my arm held me in place as we waited for Vittorio to arrive. Through the study windows, I could see storm clouds gathering over Manhattan, the kind that come on suddenly and change everything. When Vittorio arrived, he wasn't alone. Giuseppe was, with him, and another man I recognized from previous meetings, Carmine, who handled the family's finances. They looked serious in a way that suggested something had shattered. We have a problem, Vittorio said without preamble. He placed a folder on the desk. One of our own has been passing information to the Castellano family. I felt Alessio's entire body go rigid beside me. How certain are we? Alessio asked quietly. Completely, Vittorio said. We've known for 3 weeks. We've been allowing the traitor to continue providing information while we've fed them false intelligence. But today, they made a mistake. Today, they provided information that could only have come from the inner council. He opened the folder. Photos spilled out images of me. In the lounge, at the gala, entering the penthouse. The documentation of my entire integration into Alessio's life. Someone showed these to the Castellano family and suggested that if they moved against you through her, you'd fold, Vittorio said. The implication being that the traitor wanted the Castellano family to make that move, so they could take over, Alessio said, understanding immediately. While I was distracted with her recovery or her death, my mouth was dry. Who? I asked, but I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Vittorio looked at his son. Something passed between them, a moment of understanding that belonged only to them. Giuseppe, Alessio said. It wasn't a question. Giuseppe, who'd been with the family for 30 years. Giuseppe, who'd picked me up from the lounge when I was afraid. Giuseppe, who'd never spoken to me with anything but courtesy. I'm sorry, Giuseppe said. And he sounded like he actually meant it. But your father is getting old, and you're not ready to lead. The Castellano family is willing to let you live if you step aside. They're willing to let all of us live if someone more capable takes over. Alessio's expression didn't change, but something fundamental shifted in the air around him. It was like watching a predator recognize that the prey had suddenly turned dangerous. You've been with this family since before I was born, Alessio said quietly. I know, Giuseppe said, which is why I wanted to spare you the hard choices. Let me take this burden. Let you have a normal life. With her? Alessio gestured toward me. You think I could have a normal life with her after this? Something in the way he said it, something in the distance that had opened between us, made me understand that I was about to lose him. What happens to Giuseppe? I asked. Nobody answered. But I knew. I'd read enough about organized crime to understand how these things ended. Betrayal didn't have a future in this world. It had a conclusion, and that conclusion involved violence and finality. Wait, I said. Alessio, wait. He turned to me. His eyes were completely empty. Don't, I said. Don't do this. Do what? He asked. Enforce consequences? That's not optional. Nina, that's the foundation everything else is built on. Then the foundation is broken, I said. And you're just repeating the cycle. What cycle? He asked. The one where loyalty is rewarded and betrayal is punished? Yes. I'm repeating that cycle, and I'll keep repeating it for as long as I exist. And where does that leave me? I asked. You become a man who executes his oldest employees, and I'm supposed to what, applaud? Pretend that doesn't change who you are? It doesn't change who I am, he said. It confirms it. I told you I wasn't a good man. I told you that staying with me meant accepting necessary violence. Well, this is necessary, and it's violent. I looked at Giuseppe. He was standing very still, his expression resigned. He'd known this was how it would end. He'd made peace with it. Don't make her watch, Giuseppe said to Alessio. It was the first sign of the man I'd thought he was someone with some capacity for mercy. She needs to understand, Alessio said. She needs to see what actually happens when someone threatens what's mine. That's not understanding, I said. That's revenge. Yes, he agreed. It is. The two aren't mutually exclusive. He gestured to Vittorio, who left the study with Giuseppe. I heard the elevator open. I heard them descend. I didn't hear anything after that, which was almost worse than if I had. Alessio walked to the window. He stood there, silhouetted against the storm, looking at the city that worshipped and feared him in equal measure. You're going to leave, he said. It wasn't a question. I don't know, I said, and it was the truest thing I could manage. You should, he said, while you still can, while I'm still willing to let you. Why would you let me? I asked. He turned to face me, and his expression was the most broken thing I'd ever seen. Because I just realized that everything I told you about myself was a lie, he said. Not because I was trying to deceive you, but because I was trying to deceive myself. I told you I was a certain kind of man. I was hoping that by telling you, you'd make me true. Alessio. Go, he said. Before I change my mind. Before I decide that keeping you is worth becoming exactly the monster I've been pretending I'm not. The storm hit Manhattan then, rain slamming against the windows with the force of punishment, and I understood that I was being offered the mercy he'd offered Giuseppe the chance to leave before I disappeared completely. The question was whether I could take it. I didn't leave. That's the thing about breaking points, they're not always finite. Sometimes they break, and sometimes they shatter, and sometimes they just stand there suspended on the edge, waiting for something to push them over. I went to the bedroom. I lay down in a space that still smelled like Alessio, and tried to understand what I'd just witnessed. Not the implied violence to Giuseppe, my mind was doing its best to compartmentalize that away, but the fracture that had opened in Alessio. He'd shown me his own breaking point, and the breaking point looked like a man realizing he was exactly what he'd feared becoming. Hours passed. The storm continued, and then, around 3 a.m., he came to bed. He didn't touch me. He just lay beside me in the darkness, and I could feel the tension in him like electricity. Tell me, I'm not that man, he said finally. Tell me that what just happened doesn't make me what I've always feared. I can't, I said. He made a sound, something between a laugh and a sob. I know, but I can tell you that the man who let Giuseppe make his choice, who warned him what would happen, who gave him the chance to refuse that man is not the monster he thinks he is. You don't know that, Alessio said. You're just saying what I need to hear. Yes, I admitted. But maybe what you need to hear is that being capable of monstrosity and being monstrous are different things. Maybe it's the capacity for conscience that makes the difference. He turned to me then. In the darkness, I could barely see his features. When I was 12, he said, my father brought me to watch his first execution. It was someone who'd stolen from the family, someone who'd thought the rules didn't apply to him. My father wanted me to understand the cost of disloyalty. He paused. What I understood instead was that I was capable of looking at violence and becoming desensitized to it, that I could watch something horrific and then eat dinner like nothing had happened. I understood that I could become a man who did terrible things and stopped feeling anything about it. Is that what happened? I asked. You became that man? I don't know, he said. I used to think so, but then you showed up. And suddenly I started feeling things again. Suddenly I wanted to protect something instead of just control it. Suddenly I understood what I'd been building, not an empire, but a prison. A prison I couldn't leave. He pulled me closer. When Giuseppe betrayed me, I wanted to kill him myself. Not for the betrayal, but for the betrayal of everything I'd tried to build with you. I wanted to destroy him because he threatened what I had with you. And that desire, that visceral, animal need, it terrified me. Why? I asked. Because it proved that I could still feel, he said. That underneath all the control and the calculation, there's a man who can still be hurt. And if I can be hurt, then you can be hurt. And if you can be hurt, then every single person I care about becomes a liability. I understood then. The coldness wasn't a default state for him. It was a choice he made, repeatedly, to protect the people he cared about from the consequences of his actions. You were protecting me, I said. When you told me to leave. Yes, he said. I was trying to save you from myself. The Castellano family made their move the next day. They hit one of the family's warehouses, a relatively minor operation that handled imports of Italian goods, or so the paperwork suggested. When I say they hit, what I mean is that they killed everyone inside and left a message written in blood on the walls. Moretti needs to choose. Alessio got the news while we were still in bed. He sat up, and I watched his entire physiology change. The softness, the vulnerability that he'd allowed me to see disappeared. It was like watching a door close on a man I'd just started to know. What does that mean? I asked. The message? It means they're not waiting for my father to decide what to do about me, Alessio said, getting out of bed. They're forcing my hand. I have to respond, or they'll keep hitting us. Family businesses, legitimate operations, anything connected to our name. What happens if you don't respond? We lose credibility, he said. We look weak, and weakness in this world is fatal. He showered. He dressed. He looked at himself in the mirror with an expression of absolute detachment, and I realized I was watching him armor himself, putting on not just clothes, but the entire persona of the man who could order executions and feel nothing. Stay here, he said. Lock the doors. Don't let anyone in except Vittorio. Where are you going? I asked. To remind the Castellano family why they should be afraid of us. He left before I could respond. I waited in the penthouse for 6 hours, watching the city function around me as if violence wasn't happening somewhere below. Around 6 p.m., Vittorio came to see me. He looked tired, older than he had before. What happened? I asked. He responded, Vittorio said, as was necessary. How badly? Badly enough that the message was received, Vittorio said. Not so badly that it couldn't be negotiated back from. Is he hurt? I asked. Not physically, Vittorio said. This seemed to amuse him. You've really changed him, you know. A month ago he wouldn't have cared about his own injuries. 2 months ago he would have enjoyed them. But now... He trailed off, leaving me to fill in the blank. Now Alessio had something to lose. He came back to the penthouse at midnight. There was blood on his shirt, not his own, based on how he moved. He went directly to the shower. I heard the water run and run and run, like he was trying to wash away something that wouldn't come clean. When he emerged, he didn't speak. He just pulled me against him and held me like I was the only thing keeping him anchored to the world. I'm sorry, he whispered. For what? I asked. For making you love a man capable of this. I pulled back and looked at him. I don't love you despite what you're capable of, I said. I love you including what you're capable of. I love the whole man, not the edited version. That's not love, he said. That's Stockholm Syndrome with better lighting. Maybe, I said, but I'm choosing it anyway, and choosing it makes it real. He kissed me then, and I tasted blood and darkness and the desperate hope of a man, trying to believe that he could be something other than what his life had made him. The détente lasted 17 days. For 17 days, there was an uneasy quiet. The Castellano family didn't move. The Moretti family didn't escalate. It was like watching two predators circle each other, each waiting to see if the other would blink first. In those 17 days, Alessio changed. He became less careful, more present. He stopped trying to protect me through distance and started protecting me through proximity. He wanted me with him constantly, not in a controlling way, but in a way that suggested he needed to know where I was, that I was safe, that I was still choosing to be there. On the morning of the 18th day, my mother called. Nina, something's happening, she said, and I could hear the fear in her voice. There are people watching the apartment. The school got a message saying I needed to leave immediately. My blood went cold. Get on a plane, I said. Use the credit card I gave you. Don't tell anyone where you're going. What's happening? She asked. Someone's using you as leverage, I said. But Alessio won't allow that. Just go. I hung up before she could ask more questions I couldn't answer. Alessio was in the study when I found him. He was on the phone, speaking in Italian. His voice, the particular tone that meant violence, was imminent. The Castellano family picked them up, he said. Then, we move now. Everyone. I don't care about collateral. I don't care about what looks proportional. They touched what's mine. He saw me and hung up the phone. Your mother and sister? I asked. Already in transit to a safe location, he said. The Castellano family made a move I didn't anticipate. They grabbed them from the Miami school an hour ago. Where are they now? I don't know yet, he said, but I will. And when I do, Alessio, don't, I said. Don't do something that can't be undone. He looked at me like I'd spoken in a language he didn't understand. They have your family. I know, I said. But you killing them in response doesn't save my mother and sister. It just makes you exactly the man you've been afraid of becoming. I'm already that man, he said flatly. Accepting it is just honesty. No, I said. There's a difference between being capable of violence and choosing it. You've been choosing it because you thought it was necessary. But it's not. We can find another way. He shook his head. You don't understand how this works. Then explain it to me, I said. Explain to me how violence saves anyone. It doesn't, he said. But it prevents them from doing this again. To who? I asked. To someone else? You can't prevent them from hurting anyone. You can only hurt them back. And then they hurt you back. And it never ends. Then what would you have me do? He asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. Just let them keep them? Let them use them as leverage for the rest of their lives? No, I said. But there has to be something between violence and surrender. Some negotiation, some exchange. With people who don't negotiate, Alessio said. With people who understand only power and pain. He picked up his phone again. Giuseppe, stand down. Prepare extraction instead. Negotiate the release if it's possible. If it's not. He paused. If it's not, then we go in quiet. No bloodshed. He hung up and looked at me. Satisfied? I don't know, I said. I just know that I don't want you to become someone who can hurt people and not feel anything about it. Too late for that, he said. But there was something in his tone that suggested I might have actually reached him. The extraction took 6 hours. 6 hours of waiting in the penthouse, of Alessio moving through the space like a caged animal, of me trying to understand what I was doing with a man who could order violence like it was nothing. At 8 p.m., my mother and sister arrived. My mother looked terrified. My sister looked angry. But they were alive. They were whole. Nobody had died in the retrieval. That had to mean something. I held my mother while she cried. I told my sister that everything was going to be okay, which was a lie. But it was the kind of lie that parents tell their children because sometimes the truth is too much. Alessio watched from the doorway of the penthouse, looking like someone who'd just realized what his life actually cost other people. You're leaving, he said to my mother. Tomorrow. There's a flight arranged. A house in Costa Rica. Everything is taken care of. What about Nina? My mother asked. Nina stays, he said. And when he said it, I understood that it wasn't a statement about what he wanted. It was a statement about what he was choosing. If she wants to. After my mother and sister were settled in a guest room, I found Alessio on the penthouse roof. It was raining, not the violent storm of before, but a gentle, persistent rain that soaked through his coat. You saved them without violence, I said. This time, he said. But it doesn't change what I am. It just proves that I can choose different actions under certain circumstances. It doesn't make me good, Nina. It just makes me variable. I don't need you to be good, I said. I need you to be honest. And you're being honest. That's enough. He pulled me against him, and we stood in the rain while the city spread out below us like a circuit board of light and darkness. I love you, he said. The words seemed to cost him something. I know, I said. And I love you too. Not despite what you are, but because of all of it. The violence and the capacity for mercy, the ruthlessness and the ability to feel. All of it. That's very dangerous love, he said. Yes, I agreed. And real is what matters. That night we became something permanent. Not married, the legal system felt irrelevant to what we were building, but committed in a way that suggested we were, choosing each other repeatedly, consciously, despite knowing exactly what we were signing up for. 3 months later, everything changed again. Vittorio Moretti had a heart attack. Not the kind that kills you immediately. The kind that kills you slowly, over weeks of deterioration, as your body reminds you that you're not immortal after all. I watched Alessio become something I'd never seen before. A man watching his father disappear, understanding that he was about to become completely responsible for an empire he'd never wanted. The hospital room smelled like disinfectant and dying things. Vittorio lay in the bed looking smaller than he had before, his chest rising and falling beneath the hospital gown with mechanical precision. "You'll be fine," I whispered to Alessio, standing beside him as we watched his father breathe. "I know," he said. But he said it like someone who'd just realized they didn't have a choice anymore. Vittorio died on a Thursday morning. The funeral was massive. Hundreds of people attended, some legitimate, some not, all of them understanding that they were witnessing the end of an era. Alessio stood at the graveside looking like he'd been carved from stone, his entire being compressed into a single point of control. That night, I found him in the study where everything had begun to fall apart, the study where he'd made decisions that killed men, where he'd learned that conscience was a luxury he could afford. "You're the boss now," I said. "Yes," he said, "completely." "Are you afraid?" "Terrified," he said, and the honesty of it broke something in me. I moved into his lap. He held me like I was the only thing preventing him from shattering entirely. "I want to marry you," he said into my hair. "Not because it will make me respectable, not because it will change what I am, but because I want everyone to know that you chose this. You chose me. That's the only thing I can offer that matters." "Yes," I said immediately. "You don't have to." "Yes," I said again. "I want to marry you. I want to be your wife. I want to be the woman everyone knows chose to stay with the man who can do terrible things and then look you in the eye afterward." We married quietly. Just witnesses and signatures and the kind of ceremony that happens when you understand that marriage isn't about love, it's about choice. It's about saying, "I know what you are, and I'm choosing you anyway." My mother came. My sister came. They understood, in their quiet way, that Nina, the ordinary waitress, had died the night I looked through a crack in a door and saw something I wasn't supposed to see. What had been born in her place was something more dangerous, a woman who'd fallen in love with a man capable of violence, and decided that loving him anyway was worth the cost. The Castellano family didn't move again, whether they'd decided Alessio was too dangerous, or whether they'd respected what he'd been willing to do to protect the woman he loved. I never found out. What I did understand was that by surviving them, by choosing me over easier paths, Alessio had proven something to the entire city, that he was more ruthless than they were, more willing to hurt, more committed to what he wanted. Power, I learned, is never about physical strength. It's about having something to lose, and being willing to lose it anyway, if that's what victory requires. 6 months after Vittorio's death, I found out I was pregnant. I told Alessio in the penthouse garden, surrounded by the roses and jasmine that had been growing since that first night when he'd kissed me, and told me he was offering obsession rather than love. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he pulled me against him and cried. Not soft tears, real tears. The kind that suggest your entire worldview has just shifted. "I'm going to be a father," he said, and he sounded like a man discovering a capacity for joy he hadn't known existed. "Yes," I said, "and our child is going to grow up, knowing exactly what his father is, not a romanticized version, the truth, and maybe that will help him become something better, something different. Or they'll become just like me," he said. "Maybe," I said, "but at least they'll understand the choice they're making." My labor began on a wet October night, fitting, somehow, given everything that had come before. The doctors asked about pain management, about epidurals, about the medical protocols for childbirth. I refused all of it. I wanted to feel every moment of this, the cost and the intensity and the transformation from one kind of person to another. Alessio sat beside me through the entire labor, holding my hand, whispering encouragement in Italian when English failed him. And when our daughter was born healthy, screaming, "Absolutely perfect," he cried again. I named her Lucia, after the woman he'd loved before me. He looked at me like I'd given him something he didn't deserve. "She was part of your life," I said. "She changed you. And I respect that. I want our daughter to know that love has multiple chapters. that people matter, that sometimes the people we let go become more important to us than the people we hold. He kissed me then with a tenderness that suggested he'd learned something new about what love could be when it wasn't just about possession. I held our daughter in my arms and looked at the man I'd married, the man I'd fallen in love with when I looked through a crack in a door, and I understood that this was the ending I'd never anticipated. Not darkness, not light, but something infinitely more complex. A life built on honesty instead of pretense. On choosing each other repeatedly, despite knowing exactly what we were capable of. On understanding that love could be both dangerous and real, violent and tender, obsessive and free. We were never going to be safe. We were never going to be ordinary. We were never going to be the kind of people that normal people became. But we were going to be together. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.